I didn't want to bother anyone. I just wanted to give my granddaughter a hug. But that day, on the other side of the school gates, I saw something that was never meant to be seen. Something that knocked me off my feet. Something that made my blood run cold. And it was at that moment that I realized I needed to be there. God put me in that place at that time. And everything that followed confirmed it. But before that silent afternoon, I still believed my daughter Angela had simply drifted away. That her busy life, her work, her crowded house, her single mother routine, were leaving little room for me. I fooled myself every day, telling myself it was just a phase. After all, I raised her alone. I washed neighbors' clothes, stayed up all night at the hospital, sold lunch to buy dinner. All for her. And now, she barely called me. The truth began to hurt in a different way when I noticed that even Emily, my granddaughter, my little princess, was becoming distant. Video calls were rare. The drawings she'd made for me never arrived. When I called, Angela would say she was sleeping, busy, half a cold. One excuse after another. And I, foolishly, believed her. Because deep down, we always want to believe that our family would never be able to. But that day, that Friday morning, I felt something strange in my chest. An anguish. As if someone had silently called my name. I took the bus without much thought. I got off 2 stops early. I walked slowly to school. My plan was simple. Wait for recess and give Emily a hug. That was it. But what happened next turned my life upside down. On the other side of the gate, while I was still deciding whether to call her by name, I saw something. Angela. She was there, right there, in the school's backyard. But she wasn't alone. She was with a woman I'd never seen before. The two of them were bent down, whispering. I saw Angela take something from her purse and quickly hide it in an envelope. Then she looked around nervously, as if she knew she was doing something wrong. And then, she lied. She lied to the security guard. She lied to the principal. She lied to everyone. But she didn't know I was there. And it was at that moment that a boy I'd never seen before appeared behind me, whispered something in my ear, and disappeared. I swear on everything that's holy, he simply disappeared. And what he said still echoes in my head to this day. You needed to be here. At the time, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But it was real. It was like a warning coming from another plane. Like someone was trying to protect me, or prepare me for what was to come. Before I continue, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt like someone hid something from you, if you've ever been forgotten, rejected, or made a fool of, subscribe to the channel now and comment, I understand you, because this story, unfortunately, isn't just mine. Many grandmothers go through this, and no one talks about it. But I will tell you, because what I discovered that day changed everything. My daughter's lie, the secret behind that envelope, the truth that had been hidden from my eyes. It all came to light. And you'll understand why that boy said I needed to be there. I can't explain exactly what I felt that morning, but it was as if someone had gently touched my shoulder and whispered, "Go." It wasn't a loud voice. It wasn't fear. It was a calm, insistent call. Something that came from within, but didn't feel like my own. It was as if an invisible, ancient force was guiding me. And I listened. Since my husband passed away, my world has become quieter than I ever imagined. The house was too big, the rooms closed off, the frames filled with the same photos frozen in time. Angela didn't come by often. Always in a hurry. Always on her phone. I didn't blame her, at least not then. Her life seemed difficult, and she'd never been one to share much. But little by little, I realized that the little space I still occupied in her life was shrinking. And it wasn't even out of malice. It was neglect. A kind of indifference that hurts more than a fight. Emily was my only link to something good. She had that sweet way about her, those little eyes that smiled before her mouth. On Sundays, she'd visit me. We'd eat cornbread, play dominoes, and she'd tell me school secrets as if I were a co-conspirator. It was only a few hours, but it was my fuel to keep going. Sometimes, I'd spend the whole week waiting for that Sunday. I'd mark it on my calendar as if it were a holiday. But over time, even that began to fail. Angela made excuses. She'd say Emily was tired, that she had a test, that it was going to rain. I believed her, or pretended to believe her, because accepting that they're slowly taking you out of their lives is a pain that has no cure. But that Friday, it wasn't Emily who pulled me. It wasn't nostalgia. It was something else. Like a warning from the universe. I put on my light blue blouse, the one Emily said made me look like a grandmother in a movie. I got on the bus and headed to school. I didn't tell anyone. I just went. And that's exactly how I needed to be. Without warning. Without alerting. Without interfering in what was about to happen. The walk to school was shrouded in a kind of emotional haze. You know when you walk through a familiar place, but everything feels different? Slower, quieter, more charged? It was as if each step was taking me to the center of something I didn't yet understand. And I felt it throughout my body. A chill in my stomach, but without fear. A chill on my arm, but without wind. It was the same feeling you get when you walk into a room and sense something's wrong, even when everything seems right. When I arrived in front of the school, I stood there for a while, outside. I didn't call for Emily. I didn't go in. I just watched. It was there, on the other side of the fence, that everything began to change. Angela was in the backyard. She didn't see me. She seemed nervous, talking quickly to a woman I'd never seen before. Her body was slightly hunched over, her eyes restless. And that's when my heart raced. I knew that look in her eyes. It was the same look she'd had when she'd lied to me as a child. The same restlessness in her body. The same care not to be caught. I saw her pass the envelope. I saw her hide something in her purse. And I also saw that she didn't want anyone to know. There, in that moment, I understood that something much bigger was happening behind that seemingly normal routine. It wasn't just estrangement. It wasn't just fatigue. It was secrecy. It was manipulation. It was a hidden truth that had been zealously concealed. And somehow, I was being pulled into it all. Like a chess piece forgotten on the board, but suddenly becomes the key to the game. And when that boy appeared, out of nowhere, and said what he said, everything became clearer, as if someone had turned on a light in a dark corner I'd been avoiding. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't chance. It was fate. An intervention. A warning. And when he disappeared as quickly as he'd appeared, I understood I could no longer ignore what I was feeling. The journey had begun. And somehow, I knew this story wasn't just about me. I was about to discover that behind that envelope lay more than a family secret. There was something that could change everything. And perhaps even save what little I had left of my relationship with Emily. I just had no idea the impact this revelation would have on my life. Or that the next decisions I would make would be the most difficult of my life. At that moment, standing there in front of the gate, clutching the strap of my bag tightly as if it might give me courage, I felt as if I were out of time. The sound of cars in the distance seemed muffled. The noise of children playing inside sounded distant. Everything slowed. It was as if I were in one of those dreams where you sense something important is about to happen, but you can't move. Emily was there. In the courtyard. Smiling. Running with her hair loose, her shoes half untied. And for a moment, all the pain in my chest vanished. I just wanted to call her, open my arms, smell the baby shampoo, and hear her say, "Grandma," in the sweet way only she could. But before I could raise my hand or open my mouth, something, or rather someone, appeared right beside me. It was a boy. He must have been 8 or 9 years old, at most. But the look, that look wasn't that of an ordinary child. It was deep, steady, too calm. He didn't seem scared or curious. He didn't ask me anything. He didn't offer me a smile. He just stood there, staring into my eyes as if he already knew me. As if he'd been waiting for me. And then he spoke. Just one sentence. Quiet. Almost a whisper, but each word sank into me as if written in fire. You needed to be here. That was it. That was it. And the next second, he was gone. I looked around, took a step back. I tried to see where he'd gone. But there was no one else. No sign of a child. Not the sound of footsteps. Nothing. The place where he was now seemed too empty. It didn't make sense. It was as if he'd been placed there just to say that, and then disappeared at that exact moment. My body reacted before my mind. I felt a chill run down my spine. My heart beat a strange rhythm. I wasn't afraid, exactly. It was something else. It was as if a key had turned inside. As if I'd just been invited to see behind the scenes of something hidden. A kind of secret passage opening before me, but only to those who truly see. I turned my gaze back into the school. Emily was now sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons. So calm. So oblivious to everything. And in the background, Angela appeared again. This time with quickened steps, talking on the phone. The woman she'd been whispering to before was no longer around. But the nervousness was still there. In her tense shoulders. In her hurried gait. In her eyes that avoided eye contact with anyone around. I hid behind a thin tree. It wasn't the most effective hiding place, but it was all I had. I stood there half-hunched, trying to hear what Angela was saying on the phone. I slowly picked up the phone and activated the audio recording. The image of that child, the boy with the ancient look, still pulsed in my mind, as if he'd given me a mission. And I couldn't fail. She spoke softly, but enough for me to understand bits and pieces. Yes, she doesn't suspect anything. I just need a few more days. The school can't know. Every word was a stab in the back. It was my daughter. That girl I defended against everything and everyone, now talking about lies, deceit, and worse, involving her own daughter's school. At that moment, a part of me wanted to run. Go to her, scream, ask what she was doing, what she was hiding. But another part, the stronger one, made me stay there. Silent. Watching. Because I knew that if she found out I was there, everything would be lost. And something inside me told me that this situation was just the tip of something much bigger. It wasn't just about lies. It wasn't just about money. It was about impact. About fate. About decisions made in secret that could affect the future of an innocent child. My granddaughter. The only shred of tenderness I had left. And the truth was, if I did nothing, she might also be dragged into this darkness Angela seemed to carry in her pockets. I took a deep breath, holding back tears. So much was racing through my head. Fear, anger, frustration. But above all, a frightening clarity. I was there for a reason. That boy, if he really was a boy, was right. I needed to be there. And I needed to find out what, exactly, Angela was hiding. Because something told me that if I didn't act now, there might not be another chance. And, as painful as it was, I knew the journey I was about to begin would require more courage than I thought I had left. I knew I shouldn't be there like that, hiding like an intruder in my own daughter's life. But something told me that if I didn't see it for myself, no one would tell me the truth. I no longer trusted what Angela was saying. The distance, the little lies I'd ignored over the years. It all now felt like part of something much bigger. As if those loose pieces were finally starting to fit together. I continued watching, without moving. Angela approached the side gate, the one almost no one used. The woman waiting for her wasn't part of the school staff. I knew that much. She wasn't a teacher, nor a coordinator. I'd never seen her in photos of events, not on those Sundays when Emily proudly spoke about the Teachers' Awards. This woman had a different posture. Her hair tied tightly, sunglasses even in the shade, and measured steps. She wasn't there by chance. The two greeted each other quickly, without hugs, without smiles. It was a cold, methodical encounter. They spoke quietly, looking around. Angela was visibly nervous. She was sweating, even in the mild weather. She touched the strap of her bag repeatedly, as if leaning on something to keep from collapsing. After a few seconds, she removed a brown envelope from her bag. It was folded, with something thick inside. It wasn't just paper. She handed it over discreetly. The woman took it with one hand, glanced quickly at the contents, and put it away without saying anything. At that moment, something shifted in my daughter's body. Her shoulders slumped slightly, as if she'd just carried a weight. But it wasn't relief. It was exhaustion. A kind of silent surrender. The kind of exhaustion that can't be cured with rest, because it comes from within. I know that expression. I've seen it in the mirror many times, after sleepless nights working 3 jobs to provide a decent life for herself. Angela then said something I couldn't hear, but the other woman responded with a firm nod and a gesture that deeply bothered me. She placed her hand on her shoulder as if to remind her, "You know who you're dealing with." It was quick, but the tension between them was palpable. And when they parted, Angela looked around one last time. For a second, her eyes almost met mine. Almost. My heart raced, as if I were about to be caught. But she didn't see me. She just turned and walked away quickly, fiddling with her phone. She disappeared behind one of the columns of the Secretariat building. The woman, in turn, went in another direction. She didn't enter the school. She walked outside, as if to avoid any involvement with the school environment. I followed her with my eyes until she turned the corner and disappeared. When I turned my attention back to the gate, Emily was no longer in the courtyard. I stood there, alone, my breath shallow and my hands trembling. Something inside me told me that envelope held more than just papers. It was a symbol, a proof. But of what? I didn't know yet. But the way it all unfolded, the body language, the nervous glances, the charged silence, was enough to alert me that secrets were being exchanged. And that my daughter was in the middle of it all. It was strange to realize that, even with all the maternal instinct that had accompanied me for decades, I could no longer read Angela the way I used to. It was as if she had constructed a new version of herself. A closed, distant, layered version. And behind this facade lay something dark. Maybe pain. Maybe guilt. Or worse, maybe choices she made knowing exactly what she was doing. At that moment, the boy's image came back to me. His words echoed again. "You needed to be here." It made even more sense now. It was as if someone, something, knew this moment would happen. This truth needed to be seen. And that I, no matter how tired, forgotten, or left out, still had a role in this story. Perhaps I was being called to do something no one else could. Because I was the only one who saw everything from the outside. The only one who wasn't part of the games, the lies, the disguises. And perhaps, precisely because of that, I was the only one capable of seeing the truth clearly, of cutting through the veil, of revealing what was hidden between unspoken words and restrained gestures. But I also knew this discovery wouldn't come without pain. Because the closer we get to the truth, the more it demands of us. Courage, clarity, and above all, a willingness to change everything. Because certain revelations, once seen, cannot be ignored. And in that moment, I was fully aware that my journey of transformation hadn't even begun. I had barely entered the labyrinth. And what lay ahead would require more than vigilance. It would require decisions. The kind that changed the course of an entire family. You know when you spend your whole life trying to justify someone's behavior because you love them with all your heart? When every cold attitude, every prolonged silence, every half-assed apology becomes just another rough patch. I did that for years with Angela. I clung to the image of the sweet girl who liked to sleep cuddled up to me and cried when I went to work at night. But there, standing on the sidewalk outside school with my chest tight and my heart silently warning, I began to see that that image no longer captured the woman she had become. Suddenly, the little episodes I'd dismissed as nothing major began to flash before my eyes as if someone had flipped a switch inside my head. That time my insurance check disappeared from the drawer and Angela swore I must have lost it. The strange connection from the school asking for Emily's documents. even though I'd never been listed as a guardian. The doctor's appointment for my granddaughter that was cancelled without explanation, with Angela saying everything was already taken care of. All of this came back with a different color, a dark hue, as if every detail was now part of a plot far more complex than I'd imagined. That day, after everything I'd seen, I walked home slowly. I refused to take the bus. I needed the time on the way to organize my thoughts, to try to understand exactly what was unfolding before me. It was like putting together a puzzle in the dark. I could feel the pieces in my hands, but I couldn't quite see the whole picture yet. And the truth is, even without meaning to, I had already begun to form a new mindset about everything involving my daughter. Because the lies were there, clear. And they were no longer little lies of convenience. They were structured, planned lies. There was intent. And most cruel, there was coldness. A coldness that doesn't suit someone who claims to love. That doesn't suit someone who once called you hero mother at your high school graduation. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd served Angela so many cups of coffee while she complained about the world. And I cried. Not the desperate kind, but the kind that comes like a wave you can't hold back anymore. It was pain mixed with disappointment. An old wound I didn't know was still raw. Because it's hard to accept that the person you raised with so much effort could be making choices that put her own daughter at risk, and with no shame in hiding it from you. It was at that moment that I realized I needed to stop waiting for explanations. They wouldn't come. Angela was no longer the girl who told everything. And if I wanted to protect Emily, I would have to find the answers myself. No scandals, no impulsive confrontations. I would have to act strategically. I would need proof, clarity. Because this situation wasn't just emotional. It was real. And it could have serious consequences. I grabbed my old notebook, the one I'd used since I was widowed to organize bills and reminders, and started writing everything down. Dates, phrases, people, places. I was going to piece this puzzle together, piece by piece. And the hidden truth Angela was trying to protect. I was going to uncover it. Because it wasn't just about me. It was about Emily. About her future. About the kind of world she was being forced to live in without knowing it. And I wasn't going to let her bear the weight of her own mother's wrong choices. With each entry, a new memory surfaced. Angela asking to use my address for unimportant correspondence. The receipt for a loan taken out in my name, which I only found out about because the bank called. A night she showed up with a different car and said it belonged to a friend. So many things I'd swept under the rug, pretending trust was more important than questioning. But blind trust is dangerous. And I was beginning to understand that too late. The transformation that began within me that day wasn't just emotional. It was spiritual too. Because, for the first time, I realized that truly loving someone also means setting boundaries. It means protecting what's right, even when it means confronting the one you love most. And that was one of the hardest decisions of my journey. Because, until then, I'd always chosen silence. The apparent peace. The path of least pain. But now it was no longer possible. I looked at Emily's picture frame on the shelf and felt a lump in my throat. Those eyes reminded me of what was at stake. It wasn't just my reputation, nor the fear of fighting with Angela. It was the impact of all this on a child's life. A girl who trusted me, who ran into my arms every time she fell. I needed to be strong for her. I needed to find the truth. And most of all, I needed to understand how far Angela was willing to go to keep this secret hidden. That night, I lay there unable to close my eyes. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangled around my legs, my head racing with thoughts. That boy's voice, if it was indeed a boy, kept piercing through me as if he was standing in the room, whispering in the darkness. You needed to be here. It was just a sentence. But it carried a weight I couldn't explain. It was as if a forgotten part of my spirit had been awakened there, at that gate. As if a mission had been activated. And now, there was no longer any way to pretend nothing had happened. I closed my eyes tightly. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in a long time, I truly prayed. Not the automatic prayer we repeat before bed, but a real, urgent conversation. I asked God to show me what to do. To give me clarity, wisdom, courage. Because, deep down, I knew what had to be done. But I also knew what it would cost. Confronting Angela would be like opening a wound that never fully healed. Our relationship, though silent in recent years, was still delicately held together by invisible threads. The memory of her childhood, the time she still called me Mom in a sweet tone, the Sundays when Emily came and for a few hours the world seemed right. But the truth now was different. I saw it with my own eyes. I felt it with my own body. And to ignore it would be like betraying not only myself, but also my granddaughter. But at the same time, what if I'd misunderstood everything? What if that envelope was nothing? What if the nervous conversation was just a misunderstanding? What if Angela was going through something, and instead of helping, I was making it worse with my distrust? Doubt gnawed at me, and with it, the fear of losing forever what little we still had. Because there's a kind of silence between mother and daughter that seems bearable, until we realize it's become absence. I got up and went to the kitchen, looking for something to calm my heart. I made some tea, leaned against the counter, and stood there watching the steam rise like smoke from my thoughts. It was at that moment that I realized I could no longer live on assumptions. I already had enough proof that something was wrong. Maybe I didn't have all the details, but I had enough to know that what was happening wasn't common, and certainly not safe. The biggest question now was how to confront without destroying. How to protect Emily without causing a war within the family. I've seen too many stories shattered by unspoken truths. Words that come out in anger, accusations that become walls, and what was supposed to be salvation turns into separation. And I didn't want that. But I also couldn't remain inactive. The next morning, I sat down with my notebook. I listed everything I knew. Dates, behaviors, clues. I began to draw a timeline. And the more I wrote, the clearer everything became. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't drama. It was a pattern. Something Angela had been building for a long time, with patience and care. A second life, hidden from the eyes of those who truly knew her. And then, amidst these notes, I remembered a conversation I'd had with Emily months ago. She'd told me that she sometimes slept over at a friend of Mom's house, but that she never saw this woman during the day. That the house was sparsely furnished, and no one could know she was sleeping there. At the time, I just thought it was strange. But now, with everything I know, those words took on a new meaning. A dangerous meaning. It was clear Angela was trying to hide something big. And she was using Emily to do it. It chilled me to the core. Because it wasn't just about a possible crime anymore. It was about exposing a child to situations she didn't even understand. And I couldn't let that go. The dilemma wasn't just moral. It was emotional. It was existential. Because it shook the image I'd built of myself for so many years. The strong mother who protects, understands, and forgives. But also now, the grandmother who must decide between protecting her daughter and saving her granddaughter. Between maintaining the semblance of peace or causing a necessary rupture. This was the hardest part of this journey. The silent transformation that happens within us when we realize we need to turn the key. And there's no turning back. I could feel my body changing, my breathing slowing, my mind sharpening. The observer mindset gave way to the doer mindset. And it scared me. But it also gave me strength. Because I had survived so much in life. Grief, poverty, abandonment, and I knew that if I had to face it, I would. Even if it was alone. I looked at Emily's photo on the shelf again. I took the frame in my hands. There, in that toothless smile, lived everything that still made sense. Every reason to keep going. All the motivation to make the hardest decisions. Because, even without knowing it, she depended on me more than ever. And in that moment, I realized the answer to my prayer wouldn't come in the form of a magical sign, but a practical choice. I would have to talk to Angela. I would have to look into her eyes and seek the truth. It didn't matter what came next. Because when fate whispers, we can still choose to ignore it. But when it speaks through the mouth of a child who appears and disappears like the wind, we listen. And we act. I didn't want to believe it, but the clues began to pile up as if the universe had decided, once and for all, to push me toward the truth. And when the truth appears before us naked, dirty, and without makeup, there's no unseeing it. You can try to close your eyes, change the subject, make excuses. But it's still there, staring back at you, challenging everything you thought you knew. It was in the silence of my living room, alone with my notebook and the old laptop I'd inherited from my husband, that everything began to unfold with frightening clarity. I searched names, companies, addresses. The woman at the gate's name led me to a list of public documents that, until then, I'd never imagined I'd access. A small contract, which seemed like just another piece of paperwork, contained something that stopped me in my tracks. Emily's name was listed as the recipient of state aid. And further down, the name of her legal guardian. Angela. Apparently, my daughter had been receiving funds in her own daughter's name. But this wasn't illegal in itself. The problem was that she was hiding it from the school, from her family. And more seriously, there were records that the guardian's address was different from the one she officially used. With a few more searches, I found other clues. 2 benefit cards issued in different names, but with the same phone number, Angela's. A social worker mentioned in an anonymous forum warning about scams in children's programs. And in the midst of all this, the name of that mysterious woman emerged as a sort of facilitator. There was no direct proof, but the pattern was clear. Angela was part of an informal network that used children as shields. And my granddaughter, my most precious possession, was in the middle of it all. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. It felt like I'd opened a door I'd rather never have found. But now it was wide open. And walking through it was inevitable. The feeling of betrayal gnawed at me. It wasn't just the lie. It was everything it represented. The broken trust, the manipulation hidden in the details, the callousness of placing a child at the center of such a despicable scheme. I tried to remember all the times Angela had made me seem crazy. All the time she'd subtly turned the conversation against me, calling me forgetful, exaggerated, too old to understand the modern world. I'd swallowed it all in silence. For love. For peace. But now I understood. It wasn't just disrespect. It was purposeful distraction. It was control. An attempt to keep me out of the way. To silence me. And keep me away, while she did as she pleased with her daughter's life. I swallowed the pain like someone swallowing poison, knowing there's no antidote. And there, amidst the inner chaos, a part of me began to rise again. As if something ancient, which I'd let slumber for years, had awakened with anger. Not a destructive anger, but an indignation that gives direction. The strength that only comes when you realize that, however difficult it may be, you can no longer be a spectator in your own story. I opened a new folder in my closet and started putting everything away. I printed documents, organized screenshots, and jotted down names. It was practically a dossier. I didn't yet know what I would do with it, but I knew I needed to have it. If Angela tried to deny it, I'd have a way to prove it. If anyone tried to keep quiet in the name of family, I'd have a way to respond with facts. And in this process, I realized something even more painful. She wasn't just lying to me. She was using her image as a single mother, a hardworking woman, as a shield. A narrative constructed so no one would doubt her. And it infuriated me. Because I was that woman. I know the exhaustion, the struggle, the pain of raising a child alone. And seeing my own daughter turn that into a facade made me feel used. Violated, in a way. But between pain and action, I chose the latter. There was no more room for hesitation. Emily needed me. And I needed to be whole for her. Strong, clear-headed, firm. Because if the world around her was being built on lies, someone had to bring back the truth. Someone had to break this cycle of deception. That day, I prayed again. But I didn't ask for signs or explanations. I asked for strength. I asked for my voice to be heard when the time came to speak. I asked that Emily not be hurt in the process. And I asked, from the bottom of my soul, that Angela, somehow, would still find salvation. Because despite everything, despite every lie and manipulation, a part of me still loved her. And it's that love that makes everything harder, more confusing, heavier. But love also means protection. And when the one you love becomes a threat to the innocent, you have to choose. And I had already made my choice. I just had no idea what was yet to come. Or how, in trying to save Emily, I would end up discovering something even deeper. A truth that went beyond any scheme. Something that would challenge everything I believed about my own family. I was always taught to resolve things within the home. Swallow my tears, straighten my posture, keep the family intact even when inside it was falling apart. But there comes a point in life when we understand that protecting silence is the same as protecting a mistake. And at that point in my journey, I could no longer pretend it was just a misunderstanding, that Angela didn't know what she was doing. She knew. And worse, she knew no one would ever confront her. But she didn't count on the fact that, after all this, I still had the strength to get back up. And I did. With the folder of documents in hand, I entered the school with determined steps. The receptionist tried to stop me, saying it would be better to make an appointment, but the look in my eyes said it all. I asked to speak to the principal. She said it was urgent. And for the first time in a long time, I saw someone look at me attentively. Not as if I were a confused old woman, but as someone carrying an important truth. She welcomed me into a private room, and without beating around the bush, I opened the folder on the table and explained. I told her about the duplicate records, the fake names, the conflicting proof of address. I talked about my daughter's strange behavior, Emily's unexcused absences, the increasingly flimsy excuses. I showed her the screenshots, the public documents, the trails Angela had left over the months. The principal listened to me silently, taking notes. She didn't question me. She didn't hesitate. She simply said, "We will investigate immediately." That sentence didn't bring relief, but it did bring direction. It was as if someone had finally taken on some of the weight I'd been carrying alone. A sharing of the burden. And even though I knew the path ahead would be turbulent, there was something comforting in realizing I was no longer shouting into the void. As I left school, my hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. It was as if an inner door had been flung open. That dormant version of myself, that woman who braved an entire world to raise a daughter alone, had returned. And with it came a lucidity that only those who have lost everything can carry with ease. When you have nothing left to hide, you also have nothing left to fear. I got home and, without thinking much, dialed Angela's number. She answered with that hurried voice, like someone always running from something. I told her I needed to see her. That it wasn't a request, it was a summons. She huffed on the other end of the line, but she came. She always comes. Because no matter how hard she tried to distance herself, I knew there was an invisible thread that still connected us. A thread that day, began to fray. She entered my house with the same steady step as always, her eyes hiding tiredness and anger. She sat at the table as if expecting some kind of charge. But when I opened the folder and placed everything in front of her, the color of her face changed. First, surprise. Then, anger. And finally, that silence. The kind of silence that betrays guilt before the words even come out. "Why did you do that?" I asked calmly. She tried to laugh. To deny it. To say I was exaggerating. That I didn't understand how the world worked these days. And it was at that moment that I felt strength rise. A serene, firm, ancestral strength. I may be old, Angela, but I'm not blind. And I'm certainly not weak. The words came out more firmly than I expected. It was as if, by saying them, I was pulling at a thread that had been stuck in my throat for years. Her reaction was to fall silent. For the first time, she didn't have a ready answer. She couldn't spin the story. The truth was out in the open, and there was no longer any way to sweep it under the rug. I told her everything. Firmly. With compassion too, because despite the pain, I'm still a mother. I told her the school had opened an investigation. That if she didn't explain herself, the case would be taken forward. That Emily was at risk. And that, if necessary, I would take custody of her. Angela looked at me as if I'd hit her hard. But she didn't retaliate. She didn't cry. She just took a deep breath and lowered her eyes. That moment between us was more than a confrontation. It was a turning point. A crack in the wall of appearances she'd built for so long. And even though I knew it wouldn't be easy to rebuild from there was also a glimmer of hope. Because sometimes, it's only when the ground breaks completely that we realize where we're standing. After she left, the house fell silent. But it wasn't the cold silence of before. It was a different kind. A silence after a storm. That pause between the thunder and the new sky. I sat in the porch chair, looked at the horizon, and thought of Emily. The purity in her eyes, the way she still saw the world without masks. It was because of her that all this made sense. And it was because of her that I would carry on. But that very night, something happened that I hadn't expected. Something that no spreadsheet, no document, no record could have predicted. And something that would completely change the course of what I thought I knew until then. Because not all truths come through logic. Some arrive as a whisper, a presence, a forgotten detail. And that was exactly what returned to my door, when I least expected it. The house was silent for hours after that conversation. It was a heavy silence, but necessary. The kind that slowly descends on the soul like a fine rain after stifling days. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate either. There was no joy in that moment, just a deep sense that I had done what needed to be done. For Emily. For myself. And even for Angela herself, even if she didn't know it yet. The next morning, I received a call from the school principal. The investigation was moving quickly. They had already cross-referenced data, found inconsistencies, and contacted social services. The truth, now backed by documents and testimony, became an official process. And as painful as it was to see it all come true, there was a strange kind of peace in knowing I wasn't crazy. That my intuition hadn't failed me. That voice, the boys, or whatever it was, had truly guided me to where I needed to be. Days later, Angela was called to provide clarification. She tried to justify, prevaricate, and claim it was all a misunderstanding. But the force of the facts was unbeatable. The woman she'd made the arrangements with confessed. She said she'd met Angela through an online group that taught alternative ways to receive government aid. They used fake names, edited documents, and fabricated situations. It was a complete act, and Emily was the main character, without ever having rehearsed a single line. The judge ruled on an emergency basis that Emily's custody would pass to me, at least temporarily. And although I felt the weight of this responsibility, something inside me blossomed. It wasn't pride, much less relief. It was an old purpose, buried under years of pain and invisibility, surfacing like someone rediscovering their life's mission. Caring for Emily wasn't a burden. It was a calling. Angela wasn't arrested. But she was forced to comply with correctional measures, begin psychological treatment, and perform community service. Her record now had a stain, and perhaps that's why she finally stopped running from herself. For the first time in a long time, she remained silent before justice. She didn't defend herself. She didn't point fingers. She just listened. And when she left the courtroom, she looked at me as if she finally saw. Not with love, nor with anger. With acceptance. As if she understood, albeit belatedly, that the truth is not the enemy. It's just a delayed visit. Emily arrived with her little blue backpack and a look of confusion, of tiredness. It was as if she knew, on some level, that everything had changed. But over time, she began to relax. She went back to playing with her dolls, laughing out loud, and sleeping without nightmares. And me. I went back to baking homemade bread, hanging clothes on the line, telling bedtime stories. Simple things, but full of meaning. One afternoon, while we were washing dishes together, she asked me, "Grandma, do I live with you forever now?" I smiled and replied, "For now, yes, my love. And as long as you need me, I'll be here." She nodded as if that were enough. And indeed it was. Because in that moment, no signature, no judge, no sentence was worth more than that exchange of glances. I began to notice small transformations happening within me. Things that had previously seemed burdensome to me were now just part of my routine. Waking up early, packing my backpack, picking up Emily from school, hearing about her favorite teacher, helping her draw pictures for her bedroom wall. All of this, which might seem ordinary to many, was a second chance for me. A quiet, fresh start. A reconnection with something I thought I'd lost. The ability to love lightly. Angela, for her part, began sending me sporadic messages. At first, curt. Then, more human. She asked how Emily was doing, said she was trying to regroup, that therapy was unlocking things she hadn't even known existed within her. I listened. I responded carefully. Without rancor, but also without rushing. Because emotional wounds don't have a healing timeline. And I wasn't there to demand a miracle. I just wanted to see, one day, some form of accountability emerge from the rubble. Justice, in this case, didn't come with handcuffs or scandal. It came with silence. With a change of environment. With new routines. With a child sleeping peacefully again. And that, for me, was what mattered. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted protection. I wanted to ensure that Emily could grow up without carrying the weight of decisions that weren't hers. At many moments, I found myself wondering if Angela had always been this way or if she'd lost her way. The answer never came clearly. But perhaps the truth is more complex than right or wrong. Perhaps she was swallowed up by a world of emotional scarcity, of wrong choices, of unmet needs. And I, in some way, also had my share of this process. What matters now is that there was a pause. A break. A real chance for a new beginning. And we only find that when we have the courage to face the darkness without blinking. I didn't know what the future held. If Angela would be able to rebuild her life. If Emily would one day ask more deeply about everything that had happened. But the present was entirely in my hands. And for the first time in years, I felt I was living with purpose. Not to be the heroine. Not to be a martyr. But simply to be who I am, a woman who has seen too much, lost too much, kept silent too much, and who has now chosen to act. And it was precisely at that moment, when everything seemed to finally be falling into place, that something unexpected crossed my path again. It wasn't a piece of paper, nor news, nor a message. It was a presence. One of those things we don't see with our eyes, but feel on our skin. And this time, it didn't come with a warning. It came as a sign. As if the journey I thought was ending, was just beginning. That morning, everything was too quiet. The kind of quiet that, instead of reassuring, makes us pay attention. Emily was already at school. I had tidied the house, prepared the rice for lunch, and left the beans on low heat. The routine had finally found a new rhythm. But even with everything seemingly in place, there was something in the air I couldn't quite name. A light, almost imperceptible sensation. As if someone were watching me tenderly. Not threateningly. Quite the opposite. It was a gentle presence. Familiar. I walked out into the garden. The sun was still warm. The grass smelled of dew, and the wind gently ruffled the leaves of the plum tree at the back of the yard. I sat in the wooden chair my husband had made years ago and closed my eyes for a moment. I took a deep breath. And then I felt it. A shiver slowly crept up my spine. It wasn't fear. It was memory. It was as if everything I'd experienced up until that point, the scares, the confrontations, the pain, the discoveries, the transformation, had led me to that exact moment. And in that instant, I remembered the boy again. The one who'd appeared at school. Who'd looked at me with a preternatural calm. who'd whispered the thing that changed the entire course of my life. You needed to be here. Those words never left me. Because they weren't spoken in haste, nor in desperation. They were spoken with certainty. With the peace of someone who already knows what will happen. And there, in the garden so many days later, I understood their true meaning. I didn't need to wait for great revelations to recognize that that encounter had been more than coincidence. It was a calling. A sign. And it doesn't matter where it came from, whether it was from God, an angel, my instinct, or my husband's spirit watching over me from afar. What matters is that I listened. And because I listened, everything changed. If I had ignored that feeling, that restlessness in my chest, if I had said, "It's all in my head," and moved on with my eyes closed, Emily would still be unknowingly being used. And Angela might still be sinking into silence. Sometimes, what saves a life isn't what we shout, but what we hear when we're silent. There's one thing no one teaches us when we become mothers, and then grandmothers. That part of our role is not just to care, but to remain attentive. That true love is not passive. It observes. It notices absences, small deviations from the route, stray phrases spoken in low tones. True love hears what's unsaid. And acts. Not impulsively, but with courage. And courage, I've learned, doesn't always come with force. Sometimes it arrives crying, trembling, doubting. But still, it arrives. And all it takes is for it to set foot in the door of our fear, and the story begins to change. It was like that for me. It was like that for Emily. And perhaps in her time, it will be like that for Angela too. Since Emily moved in with me, our house has gained color again. The walls, once silent, now hear laughter. Toys are scattered around the living room. Her drawings color the refrigerator. And I've relearned how to make hot chocolate just the way she likes it. Small things that might seem trivial. But for someone who's had their heart broken, they're daily miracles. Angela continues on her way. Still distant. Still in process. We speak, carefully. Sometimes she appears, sits at the table, watches her daughter play, and remains silent. I say nothing. Neither does she. Because there are pains that are still being undone inside. But the simple fact that she comes is already a new beginning. Not everything needs to be said to be understood. Life hasn't given me many luxuries. But it has given me this opportunity. To be useful when no one else wanted to listen. To be strong when they expected me to be silent. To turn an intuition into action. And if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that truth isn't imposed by shouting. It's sustained by the firmness of those who live with purpose. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about protecting what was right. And even though the world continues to run wild outside, here inside, where my faith resides, everything has become clearer. Because, deep down, I've never been alone. From the beginning, something or someone was with me. And if there's one phrase I carry with me to this day, it's this. Sometimes God speaks through whispers, and boys we've never seen before. And no matter how much time passes, and the memories one day begin to fade, this I will never forget. Because it was in that whisper that my life changed. It was in that moment that I stopped being just a grandmother, and became a bridge, shelter, justice, a path. The garden remains calm. The leaves continue to dance in the wind. And I remain here, whole, despite everything. Because when we decide to listen with our hearts, destiny takes care of the rest. And if I had to go through it all again, I would. Because in the end, it was this silent listening that saved everything, including myself. If you've stayed with me this far, it's because this story touched something deep inside you too. Maybe it reminded you of someone, or of something you felt but never had the space to share. And that's why this channel exists, so we can share these silent truths, so often hidden deep within our hearts. If this content resonated with you in any way, subscribe to the channel. We build these welcoming spaces and listen when we have people like you around. People who feel, who understand, who stay until the end. By the way, if you've made it this far with me, leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me." That way I'll know you listened with all your heart, and that somehow our connection was formed. Oh, and leave a like too. It's not about the number. It's about the connection. It's the simplest way to show that this kind of story matters. That this kind of conversation deserves to continue. There's a video here that complements the path we've taken today. Click and stay with me there. There's still a lot for us to talk about.